Hello and welcome to the Snickerdoodle Knits channel. I am Jessica, the knitter and designer behind Snickerdoodle Knits, and in this video I'm going to talk about my Dancing in the Rain shawl pattern design. So I'll talk about some of the inspiration behind it, I'll talk about yarn, and I'll talk about techniques, and hopefully I'll answer any questions that you have about the design. So this pattern is called Dancing in the Rain, A, because I love rain, and B, because I use lots of drop stitches, which reminds me a lot of rain. So this shawl concept was based a lot on rain. So I guess we could get into the stitches in this shawl. This is an asymmetrical triangle shawl. So that means you start at one tip. So you start right here, just working small rows back and forth until you get to the end. And then it's a lot longer, of course. So we start with garter stitch, which is just my basic in between each of the sections. I use garter. And then the first section is a honeycomb section. So it's just kind of a pretty denser section, I guess. And some more garter. And then I have some drop stitches. So I have a couple different versions of drop stitches. This is the shorter version. So they're just shorter lengths of the drop stitches. And I call this section the raindrops. And of course there's some more garter. And then we have the miniature leaves. So this section is called miniature leaves, just like in the stitch pattern book that I used. But it just has this nice open mesh look. So yeah, that's kind of in contrast to the honeycomb stitch, which is a bit more dense, but they both work beautifully, in my opinion, with the drop stitches. And then we have a longer drop stitch section. So it's a section where the drop stitches are quite a bit longer. Here you can see the raindrops. They're shorter, and these are longer. So I call this section the downpour section. And then of course we have more garter, and we start over again. So we have honeycomb, raindrops, miniature leaves, and downpour, and then that repeats again. So this pattern is completely repeatable for as long or as short as you would like. Super easy to customize that way. One thing that I will mention, if you haven't done drop stitches before, they will look a bit funny until you block them out. So they'll have like kind of be kinky and wrapped up, the yarn won't lay very flat. But blocking does wonders for drop stitches, and that's what gives it this nice definition, evens it all out, and makes it flat. So this is a really nice lightweight shawl. It is great for summer, depending on your climate, of course. Spring and fall. It's a 1 skein shawl using running on yarn 2-mile series. And this is the sea glass and turquoise, or sea glass and blue colorway. So Laura of Running on Yarn, her 2-mile run series is a bit longer than a typical just fingering weight skein of yarn. Let me check here. So this is 150 grams of fingering weight yarn that I used for this shawl. So with a different kind of yarn, of course, that would be about 1.5 skeins. If you wanted it shorter, of course, you could just use 1 skein of any other fingering weight yarn. If you wanted it larger, of course, you would do 2 skeins. So for each of my pattern designs, I have a blog post. I actually have 2 blog posts regarding the pattern. So I have one blog post that talks about the inspiration of the design, the drop stitches, the rain, all of that. That blog will be linked down below. I also have a second blog post that talks about yarn and color recommendations that I have specific for this shawl. So I have some colors that I love from Laura of Running on Yarn that I think would look gorgeous in this shawl. But then I also have yarn recommendations for more affordable yarns. So they're fingering weight yarns with approximately the same yardage per weight. I don't remember, they might have varying fiber contents, but I think any of those options would be great options for knitting this shawl at a more affordable price point for a lot of people. So that blog post will also be linked down below. The other links that you will find down below include all of the places that you can purchase this pattern. So this pattern is available on Pattern Vine, on LoveCrafts, and on Ravelry. So all 3 of those links will be down below in the description box as well. So the techniques in general, they're pretty simple. If you've ever done a drop stitch, you know what that's like. And otherwise, the most difficult section is probably the miniature leaves. It's a little more tedious, but if you give it some attention, it's not difficult. So if you're wanting to knit this pattern, I recommend that you have some experience in knowing how to knit and how to purl and being pretty comfortable in those techniques. Otherwise, the other techniques, I have a description listed out for how to perform each stitch required in this shawl, and then I have a video tutorial linked for each of those stitches as well. So you have a verbal communication and a audio visual communication of how to perform those stitches. So I think as long as you are comfortable with knowing how to knit and how to purl, the rest of the resources are available for you to get comfortable in learning how to perform the rest of these stitches. So it's a fairly simple design. I really like to repeat these stitch patterns throughout, so you'll be very familiar after the first repeat of how to do the rest of the shawl, but simultaneously, because there's that variation in stitches, even though they're being repeated, it's changing it pretty quickly. So if you get bored easily while you're knitting the same thing over and over again, I think this is a great shawl because you just have so much variation in what you're doing, and I love that a lot. So I hope that answers all of your questions regarding the Dancing in the Rain shawl. I do think it's a simple, wonderful, lightweight, summery shawl and perfect for the upcoming seasons. I hope you found this video informative and interesting to watch, and if you enjoy it, go ahead and hit that thumbs up button. If you have any questions or concerns, go ahead and drop those down in the comments and I'll get back to those as soon as I can. And otherwise, I hope to see you around. Happy knitting!